Hi everyone, Dr. Chip here, and today I'm going to do part two of my five-part stress series, a better understanding of stress. Part one was what is stress, and now we're going to do part two, consequences of stress. I have a slideshow, just makes it easier for me, and hopefully not too much information, or if it is, you can go over it again. Uh, if you need to if you want to understand what stress does to you. Okay, so let's go to the slideshow. Remember from part one, what is stress? That I pulled it from a book called The Body Keeps a Score by a psychiatrist with 30 years of PTSD research, Bessel van der Kolk, MD. And that from that book and from the research, we've learned that stress is not what most people think it is. It's actually an emotional reaction to a threat, anger, or fear. And it's not the job, the boss, the wife, the Chinese virus, the vaccine mandates. Um, Stress is the monkey in the middle, uh, feels threatened, and um, reacts with rage, fight or flight response. It looks more like this with a human being. We use words like anxiety, depression, insecurity, rage, hate, resentment, but it's stress. It's anger and fear. So today we're going to do the consequences of stress. Now that we know what stress is, and I divided it into three parts: physical consequences, psychological consequences, and spiritual consequences. And I think the physical consequences, a lot of them are obvious, like sleeplessness, anxiety, depression. The not so obvious ones: headaches, heartburn, um, migraine headaches, high blood pressure, heart palpitations, ulcers. Most people would relate that, but what about autoimmune disease, irritable bowel syndrome, even suicide? All stress related. In 1987, Joan Borisenko, PhD, wrote a book called Minding the Body, Mending the Mind. This is one of the first books back then with the mind-body connection that everybody talks about now. And now we know that one of the greatest risk factors for heart disease is frequent outbursts of anger, and one of the greatest risk factors for cancer is living in fear, the inability to speak up. These are the number one and two causes of death in the United States. Um, the third one being complications from medical treatment. So you can avoid the top three if you can avoid stress, overcome stress altogether. Um, so stress definitely contributes to physical disease and to death. There's a book by cardiologist Robert Elliott, Anger and Heart Disease, Is It Worth Dying For? And from the back of the book cover, he talked about hot reactors, people that get upset over seemingly minor things like losing a game. And that takes a heavy toll on health. It causes heart disease. And Gabor Mate, MD, wrote the book When the Body Says No, to talk about how cancer is related to not being able to speak up. That's why nice people are always the ones that get cancer. So let's continue with the physical. So what is the physical connection between stress, which is an emotional reaction up in the limbic system in the brain? How does that cause disease? Well, in The Body Keeps the Score, he talks about the polyvagal theory, or basically the vagus nerve comes from the brain and goes down just about everywhere in our body. And it carries impulses of everything's okay, but when it gets shut down by stress, then bad things happen. Our gut bacteria recede. Um, we get heart palpitations, on and on. Muscle tension, headaches. The vagus nerve goes to the muscles in our face. Um, Bessel van der Kolk did a lot of studying with functional MRI or fMRI, um, and they learned from that basically the brain is three parts when you were studying stress. The prefrontal cortex up here where the thoughts are. The limbic brain, which is down a little bit lower. Um, the middle brain, or it's called the mammalian brain, where emotions are. The amygdala is part of it. That's where they say the fear center is. And the amygdala is AMYGDALA. And then the lower part of the brain, the brainstem, right about ear level, just below the ear, is the vagus nerve center, and that's where the vagus nerve starts. And things like eating, digesting, mating activities, sleeping, that's all brainstem activity. This vagus nerve, this slide is supposed to show how the vagus nerve, which is all the arrows except for the bottom one, and there are two arrows where it comes from, the vagus complex. So all those arrows start at the lower part of the brain. Anyway, facial muscles. If somebody's angry, they can pretend to smile, but their facial muscles are autonomically controlled. You can't help, people can tell when somebody's upset just by their facial muscles. And it goes to the heart and lungs, heart palpitations, difficulty breathing, eventually things like asthma, that kind of stuff. Also to the gut. 85% of our immune system is in the gut. So it's going to affect our immune system when we're under stress. The gut bacteria, according to Natasha Campbell McBride, MD, in her book Gut and Physiology Syndrome, she says that the gut bacteria actually recede, that our healthy gut bacteria stop functioning when we're under stress due to the vagus nerve connection. So this vagus nerve, according to them, is essential to understanding how people deal with trauma, stress. Remember, in the physical approach and the psychiatric approach, they talk about all stress as being post-traumatic. They say it could be just trauma from war. That's when they first started studying it, World War I, when they called it shell shock. But let's learn about the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic, which is feeling, and parasympathetic, which is the non-feeling opposite part. The sympathetic being fear and anger and stress and adrenaline, and the parasympathetic being relaxed, calm. So this ventral vagal complex is part of the brain that lights up when the parasympathetic nervous system is sending impulses down the vagus nerve and everything's okay. But if something distressing happens, then the sympathetic nervous system takes over. This limbic system alerts, and the adrenal gland makes the adrenaline, and the heart rate starts pumping, and the gut shuts down. Interestingly, PTSD they described as hiding, or if there's no way out, nothing they can do to stave off the inevitable. That's when that monkey collapses, and that's what PTSD is in the veterans. The heart rate plunges, and people feel like they can't breathe, and they disengage, collapse, and freeze, and can't function. They need caretakers to help them make minor decisions. And we see that at the VA where I've worked. So this vagus nerve comes from the reptilian brain, from that lower brain below the ear, and goes everywhere in the body, just about. all the organs. Um, so everything could be calm, and then there's a threat. The limbic system lights up, and the sympathetic nervous system activated. So when somebody's stressed on their brain looks like this under stress, three things happen. The limbic brain lights up. The brain speech center shows markedly decreased activation, so they have trouble speaking. And the visual cortex heightened activity. That's why they say people are hyper vigilant when they're under stress. They're always looking, is that person looking at me, and worried about what's going to happen next. You can actually map the brain out to show what's going on under stress. Depresses Broca's speech area. I think is important. I've read books on autism, and Broca's speech area is what's diminished in people with autism. And there's even a book called Switched On by John Elder Robison, who has Asperger's type of autism. So this functional MRI was helpful for the physical understanding because it showed how a person who is stressed is emotional, their limbic system's lighting up, they're hypervigilant, their visual cortex is extra active, and they have difficulty communicating. Their speech center, Broca's speech area, is deactivated. And in classic PTSD or collapse, you feel no pain. That's a monkey that's hunched over and just go ahead and kill me because at least it won't hurt. And their brain shows no, cortex shows no activity. The cerebral cortex, you can see in the picture here, is just absent. Okay, so that's physically what happens with stress. Psychologically, they talk about fight or flight behavior. So the psychological model is thought, feeling, and then behavior. So the behavior is what happens after the feeling. Fight or flight. Fight behavior, which is control behavior. It's self-protection. Make other people feel the way you want to make them feel to keep a lid on your stress. Or flight behavior, avoidance behavior, escape from the emotional brain into the back of the brain, also self-protection, feeling no pain. Stressful lives are lives of chaos and crisis. There seems to be no order. Bouncing from one emotional reaction to the next. Outbursts of anger. The boss who's constantly putting out fires but doesn't seem to follow policy procedure. They're just stressed out. And this slide I like, but the title on the slide where I got it from was "Putting Out a Fire." Supposedly, this is how she's ending the argument. Okay, so humans under stress, according to the psychological model, they're either taking one of three roles, and they can bounce back and forth from one to another. They're either being a bully, a rescuer, or a victim. And more subtle signs of stress: workaholism, the overachievers, substance abuse, underachievers, high blood pressure, irritable bowel, stomach cramps, ED, autoimmune disease, Crohn's disease. Primary care doctors, when asked, say that 90% of visits to a primary care doctor are stress related. The spiritual consequences of stress: separation from God. Instead of peace, there's chaos and crisis. Judgment of self and others instead of grace. Instead of truth, lies. Instead of love, hate. And anger blinds, so unable to see clearly. And I think the biggest thing about stress is spiritually is it makes a person susceptible to being persuaded and even used by leaders and groups who do not have the individual's best interest at heart. So when people get stressed, they tend to align to a group. We see that division going on in our country right now, where people are aligning to one group or another, and it just creates more problem. Um, Stress does that. It takes us away from being an individual uh, and and identifying with a group. Um, Anyone that can make us emotional, anyone that can stress us out, can control us. They do control us. They push our buttons, so to speak. And when we're emotional, we can't think straight, can't make good decisions, can't see clearly, and the person can control us. So, in summary, the consequences of stress. Remember from part one, stress is the emotional response to a threat, anger, and fear. It's not the threat itself. Um, and the stress consequences are physical and emotional, psychological, and spiritual. So, how do you know if you have stress? Well, how do you deal well with adversity? Can you stay calm no matter what is going on? Everybody knows, even if the house is on fire, it's better to stay calm than it is to overreact. Um, how difficult is it for you to sit still? Do you rely on medication to relax or to sleep? Uh, Things like alcohol, marijuana, sleeping pills, exercise, sugar, caffeine. Sugar and caffeine are really big in our country, but nobody looks at them as ways to manage stress or signs that somebody is stressed out. The Buteco Clinic goes around the world, 150 employees, and they get paid a lot of money just to tell people uh, the way to focus on their job and improve productivity is to learn how to breathe slower. And they measure people's control stop. So when somebody's at rest, if you're at rest, like you first woke up in the morning and you're relaxed, then at the end of an exhale, at the end of a normal exhale, pinch your nose and hold your breath. And if you can go over 40 seconds, then you probably have no stress in your life. If you can't go over 20 seconds, you probably have disease. And if you're in between 20 and 40, you have a little bit of stress. Um, so, how do you deal with stress? Do you believe others should do things your way? That's control behavior. That's the fight part from fight and flight. That's a self-protective way of dealing with stress. Do you crave certain foods or caffeine or alcohol, which is an avoidance, the flight behavior? That's also a self-protective way of dealing with stress. Chronic diseases, most of them are stress related. Um, so um, I'm going to do parts 3, 4, and 5 upcoming. Managing stress is part 4, and source of stress is part 3, and the final one will be how to overcome stress, including my story, how I overcame stress. I just don't have stress anymore. Um, but if you want to get ready for part 3, then sit still twice a day. Um, just go inside. As Jesus said, go to your inner room. The inner room is inside. Close your eyes, look inside, and see. God will reveal. You'll see. Um, if you're stressed out or not, and just get to know that. Um, it's not necessary to try and manage it or do anything about it, but just be more and more aware of it. This is Jesse Lee Peterson, and this is what he recommends, called the silent prayer. Um, and then soon I'll do part 3, the source of stress. What really is stress? It's not what everybody thinks. Um, it's actually not. It's not you that causes the stress. It's not even you that is the stress. Um, if we were calm, cool, and collected, thinking about it, we wouldn't We wouldn't stress ourselves out. We wouldn't rationally give ourselves, irritable bowel syndrome or something. So it comes from somewhere else, comes from outside. That'll be part 3 upcoming. And my contact info, drchipabrahamson.locals.com. All right, thanks for listening, and I'll enjoy your comments.